Hi, everyone. My name is Mary Pagano, and welcome to Hera TV. I'm a board advisor for Hera, the Light of Women, and I'm also the founder of Hera TV. Today, I have a really interesting interview with the gentleman, Mark Hewitt, and I'll tell you a little bit about him. And a little wild story when we met up. Turns out he had great influence on the design of SmartNet technology for Motorola, which me and my team sold for years to public safety entities, both in fire and police and even in corporate America. So great product. And it really changed the world for a lot of the first responders. But anyway, Marcus got a very fascinating background. He was very instrumental in the first national VoIP broadband network in the late 1998. He worked with the Bush and Obama administration with the FCC in establishing a national broadband policy. He was also instrumental in working with the developers for America's first solar city, and we'll find out more about that. He's a mathematician and a technologist, and he's got publications on new math called the Fibonacci. I don't know if I pronounced it right. Fibonacci sequence, which led towards numerous breakthroughs in cryptology and modern computer science. He's also the founder of Lydian Foundation, and I'll let him explain a little bit about that as well. So, and we're going to talk about a lot of subjects, and as you know, Hera is building a city for all genders, all religions, all nationalities, in honor of women, and we're excited to talk to people that are in the space of making the world a better place for humanity. So with that said, Mark, welcome.
Well, thank you so much. It's an honor to be here with you, and it's so amazing to find such remarkable alignment amongst so many people of different cultures and paths, et cetera, along this one key aspect of the growth and evolution of humanity. I'm very pleased to be here.
Well, thank you. Really appreciate you joining us today. So I have a few questions for you, and you can pull up slides if you'd like to share them with the group. But I will get started if you're okay with that. And so anyway, so one of the questions I have, since you were working on America's first solar city, how was that? And what other sustainable or smart cities have you worked on?
Good question. The Babcock Ranch is what we're talking about, which you're welcome to Google it. It is now live. People live there. There's communities. They have some exciting environment. As I recall, the last statistics I saw, their solar field produces about 3 times more energy than the entire community consumes. So it's actually supporting the Southern Florida power grid with renewable energy. It was an interesting thing. At the time, I was running around working on developing a national broadband policy, knowing that broadband is one of our key aspects of building a healthy, strong economy.
Right.
And it was a bit like pushing rope uphill. But one of the engineers that was hired to work on this project called Babcock Ranch asked if I would do a presentation. And he knew my background. He knew I used to be the chairman of the Fairbanks Utility Board. And, you know, I knew what it was like to run infrastructure. And he said, if you could build a city from scratch, knowing what you know today, what would it look like? So I said, okay, gave it some thought, and I came into a charrette, which is where everybody comes together and you present ideas and you talk about it. And the charrette was supposed to last 45 minutes. It ended up being 2 hours. But I came in armed with a wealth of really remarkable data about how what the things that I actually did, we're not talking about theory, the things that I actually did in Alaska, where we did in fact have the fortune of having a considerable amount of capital coming into our cities from the oil reserves from the oil pipeline. I was able to construct a new power plant, a new energy district, a utilidor environment. And I was able to look back, and of course that was in the 80s. I was able to look back, and this was around 2005, 2006, and pull forward the numbers of what happened to the economy in Fairbanks as a result of this critical infrastructure being in place and under one roof. And it was remarkable. The numbers were extraordinary, where other parts of the country had been going through huge dips in the economy, you know, the boom bust cycles that this fiat currency that we're in the middle of since 1971 has driven us all to crazy, you know, madness. Fairbanks wasn't experiencing a lot of this. As a matter of fact, it had job growth and a variety of things, because as an example of the heat utility, which took waste energy from the power plant and distributed to the community of homes, buildings, apartments, industry, all those kind of things, cut the cost of energy to keep their homes and businesses heated, arguably by more than 50%. So I ended up making a proposal that said, what if we build a city where we take full responsibility as the developer for all of the horizontal real estate? And anyway, needless to say, 3 months later, they called me back and they said, would you like to come build it? Anyway, the rest is history. 2008 came along, and as we all know, the economic, you know, catastrophe happened. Unfortunately, people tend to go back to what they know best when they are faced with fear. And of course, that economic, which by the way, our economic forecasting, we forecasted over the 25-year period to build this city that we would go through 4 of these, right? But anyway, they converted it back to a legacy developer model where they sold building lots and those kind of things. But the utility and the infrastructure is all unified. Now, another interesting fact, I went and interviewed about 10 major US corporations, trying to recruit them to build industry in this ranch. And when I explained our, by the way, you would appreciate Chris Galvin's perfect power model from, you know, Chris from Motorola.
Yeah.
And explained what that means to their industrial facilities. Let's put it this way. I walked back with 10 for 10 letters of intent. IBM, General Motors, Genesis, I mean, the list goes on. Now, when they changed their model from my original model to where they brought in traditional mortgaging and those kind of things, they lost all of the industrial partners. They have no interest anymore. But regardless, I personally knew that vision was years ahead of itself. And I sold my company in '98 to Google, and I kind of enjoy things. So I just kept being focused on the things that we needed to do to develop both the economic framework, of which I brought from the McDonald and the earlier architects, this concept of what's called cradle to cradle design, or circular economics into the overall plan. And
Cradle
this
to cradle sounds like a Motorola term. Am I right?
it comes out of Six Sigma, right? Exactly. And by the way, we employ a Six Sigma model throughout all of our business processes. and community processes. But I also realized that this isn't just about technology. We know how to build smart cities. And if we get a chance to go build a smart city from scratch, we know how to do it. My last inventory of purposely built cities, there are currently about a little over 115 of them out there, of which more than half of them are just PowerPoint cities. But with the exception of only maybe a few, they are all a top-down model. They are all being built on this basis that somebody is in charge and it's centralized, and it's an investor that's going to make a lot of money on building or bringing people together, similar to what Dubai and other countries have done. You know, we're aware of Blockchain City in Nevada as an example. A billionaire that's putting his city together has no interest in collaborating with anybody. It's just his thing. We have the one in Senegal, which is, oh, I'm trying to remember the name of the city, I'm sorry. But there's so many of them out there. But the interesting thing is that they're all following the same old legacy path of kings and queens being in charge in the workforce where all the value is created, working for them so they make more money, making them billionaires. I mean, I think they're trying to compete with Elon Musk, who is on path to becoming the world's first trillionaire. I got to say, here's a guy who doesn't really care about that money. He can buy whatever he wants. He wants to build a rocket and go to Mars.
Yeah.
Anything else is just a distraction. So anyway, that led to papers I published on regenerative economics. I started traveling and meeting with heads of state, and we did Malaysia. I spent quite a bit of time building a hospital in Marrakesh, Morocco, where the king and queen had set aside 6 large parcels for smart city development, one of which is the location that you have already. So, you know, this was things that were on the table. I walked away from the medical city in Malaysia because the parties got greedy. You know, they were just, and I couldn't waste my time on it. I was on the way back home to the US, and this thing called a pandemic. I'd been in the UAE and had been meeting with some people from Jordan under the King's wing to build a smart city along the Red Sea there. This actually might have been, at the time, one of the first major launches of another fully blown campus type smart city, or I call them microcities. And of course, we're getting this news about this thing called the pandemic, and my then girlfriend, fiance, said, I think that you maybe should come up here to Nova Scotia, which is where she lives. And instead of going back down and getting, I had a ton of work to do. And I said, you know what? I think that's probably good intuition. So when I hit New York, I just changed terminals and caught a flight up to Halifax. And frankly, with the good graces of the Canadian government, I've been here ever since. But it's given me a remarkable opportunity to pull together the people and resources to work through the dynamics. Our engineering modeling capacities to do these things have become extraordinary. We do what's called digital twinning now, where I did Babcock Ranch with something called building information modeling, where we could, you know, see on the computer all the things that we were going to do. Today, we can actually use very advanced AI to model heat and wind and energy and water flow and, you know, walking impact, all the things that need to go into our community designs. And then I've been fortunate to sign Jacobs Engineering as a global engineering partner to be feet on the ground and help us with the launch and evaluation and planning for many of these communities. I probably have over a dozen of them on the drawing board right now with different stages of investigation and development and building their plans and helping them with financing. But we do something very interesting in our regenerative economic model. You might.
Yeah, so tell me about that. What is the regenerative economics and the MicroCity model? You mentioned MicroCity a little bit earlier. So what is that all about?
So regenerative economics is an advanced form of circular economics. It goes back to the days of Adam Smith and his paper on the wealth of nations, in that we recognize that wealth actually only comes from people. People are the only parties that actually develop or create value. Without people, there'd be no Morgan Stanleys and billionaires in the world. It all is related to the people that contribute to things. So in regenerative economics, we take the human community side of this with a founding layer of integrity. And by the way, I'm proud to say that we have Dr. David Gruder on as our Chief Integrity Officer. I will pass on some links that I encourage you to take a listen to some of his work. He has 2 new books coming out in February, which are going to be textbooks for building microcities, literally, and
Great.
how we accomplish it. I might even be able to share with you. I wrote my own formula, which helps explain.
A mathematician would do that.
There we go. So let's see if are you able to see this?
Not yet. I did give you sharing rights.
I got it.
And now
Okay.
it's coming up.
There we go. Okay. So big fan of Albert here. I mean,
Me too.
he wrote his famous E equals MC squared. I wrote my economic model, which is this. It basically says very clearly that currency, the things that we use to measure value and trade with each other, is a ratio of energy times time over resources times innovation squared. And innovation squared is the human component. It is the imagination. It's the characteristics that lead to finding and building cool things like the internet or automobiles or discovering cures for cancer, those kinds of things. And that formula, I'm going to explain.
Okay.
It has no elements of scarcity in it. Now, this is a very important concept here. We have been trained from birth, generationally, that money is dependent on scarcity. Now, the reason we've been trained that money is dependent on scarcity is that it allows a very, very small pocket of people, originally kings and queens, to control money because it's scarce.
Yeah.
But I hate to say this, the universe built the planet and raised us here without spending a nickel. And if you're a mathematician like I am, you'll recognize a very important thing. Everything is in perfect balance always. And when things go out of balance, they balance. So all this concept of debt is predominantly used to create human slavery, per se. I mean, think about it. The more we put people in debt, the more they're enslaved to the characteristics of what it does. So Another little side note, I guess I do have a pretty broad background.
Yes.
I was, I had been working on the scaling of something called the SETI at Home project. The SETI at Home project was a complex analysis of waveforms coming in on radio telescopes. And it required massive amounts of computational resources in order to see if we could find patterns in it. So while this is happening, this little guy in England anonymously publishes some code that a small group of guys in California and others picked up called Bitcoin. And I said, I'd read the same book, Digital Gold. Right? I mean, I was already working on this, right? I said, this is going to be the future. Now, here's the interesting thing. Bitcoin, as we all know, is a bit of a craze right now. But it's still not decentralized, although everybody says it is. And it is built on the framework of scarcity. There's only going to be so many Bitcoin. Therefore, the Bitcoin will increase in value because there are not going to be any more of them. Well, that's not really true. Now there's well over 1 million, ICOs out there, and there's everybody and their brother. I mean, I personally wrote a Mark coin just because I could, right? So anyway, so what we have developed, and this is where we get into the Lydian Foundation and the blockchain framework, it's like this. This, and along with some math that has been co-developed by 2 other brilliant mathematicians and myself, a new generation of cryptography. And we have designed a multi-tiered blockchain framework. Now, unlike the decision to build blockchain framework in a open source, decentralized way, which is a bit like trying to herd cats. I mean, we knew in the very early days, as a matter of fact, the very early days of Bitcoin, we had to fork the entire code because of some technological errors. So the Bitcoin that we're on today was forked almost immediately once it was up and running. And nobody had to follow that fork. They could have stayed with the old one. But what's happening now is everybody's going off in this idea that they can put $1 into something and it'd be worth $100 later. In other words, this human frailty of thinking they can get something for nothing. And people are running around like the gold rush trying to do all this stuff. But that doesn't balance an economy. Economies are built on the creation of value. So the principles of the Lydian Foundation are not only to launch a secure and scalable mechanism for a blockchain to be economically stable, in other words, support itself, but also to allow people to register their digital identities, to keep track of materials, to keep track of our health records, to do all these things that a blockchain has the ability to imprint, remember, without loss into framework that we can access. Well, at the same time, the crazies out there are embedding code into the blockchain, which has things like the encrypted address of a botnet host. So botnets can get into all of our government and other secret and secure things, and break down the walls. I'm sure we've all heard about a time or two that these leaks have occurred. So what we're also doing is putting a framework that prevents illicit use of something that powerful. And in so doing, we then partner with entire sovereign nations, other corporations, so that they can also implement their own versions. Here's where decentralization occurs.
Yeah.
It's
So
in,
you're looking at decentralized communities, and blockchain is part of that.
blockchain is a part of the technology we use to accomplish that. But decentralization occurs when we all agree on how we value our currency.
Okay.
So I wasn't the one that originally developed the concept of a synthetic currency, a hybrid between virtual currency and an asset-backed currency. And part of the reason that Nixon signed, I think it was at the act in 1971 that converted the US dollar away from gold backing to a national sovereign instrument, we call them treasuries, was because the speed at which humanity was growing its economy needed more capacity than being tied or tethered to the limits of something like gold. And this was okay, except for every economist would tell you that there has been no examples of fiat currency ever surviving in all of human history.
Mm-hmm.
When you see the great collapses, as a matter of fact, what led to World War II was the debasement of the German dollar that was necessary because after World War I, the Europeans wanted to hold Germany's feet to the fire for paying reparations from World War I. And when they imposed that much debt on the German national economy, it created an opening, and that's where Hitler rose in power and took over control of the government, again, leading to World War II. So there have been no fiat currencies ever in the history of man that have survived. But a synthetic currency that maintains stability. So it's sort of like, think of it as the economy as the ocean, and our measurement of currency as a big ship on the ocean. It rises and falls with the stability of the ocean. This way, as an example, we have a stable way of measuring value. In theory, and the AI engines that we've run simulations on seem to prove this out. And we've been able to go back 50 years and the formula stays stable. In essence, what we're saying is that a loaf of bread 10 years from now should still be a loaf of bread in this stable currency. And I'm not talking about a stable currency based on the US dollar. I'm talking about a stable currency based on how humans establish recognition of the value of our assets. It could be corn, wheat, lumber, iron, energy, trade, all kinds of different things. But when we, as a population, agree on this measure of stability, we do create true decentralization. And then governments are allowed to come in and provide the stable regulatory framework of law that we all need in order to have stable commerce and growth in our economies and security for our families. So that's the Lydian Foundation is dedicated to things like the transparency of our AI algorithms or other things like what happened to Facebook when they started manipulating misleading advertising in favor of a political candidate or not.
Yeah.
Those kind of transparencies are necessary in the future of our human condition.
So is the Lydian Foundation about protocols or?
It's really about transparency in, yeah, it is about protocols. It's about transparency in algorithms and protocols, correct.
Okay. So you have a team of people that are working across the board with a lot of entities on this?
We're in early stages, but yes, we evaluate things that we're allowed to evaluate. Sometimes we find some holes in them and we disclose them to the right people. But it's really getting cooperation from parties that want to have their AI and other algorithms transparent. A good, interesting story, as a matter of fact, if you go back a few months, Wired had a cover sheet on this. A MIT student at the Media Center, MIT, was working on a project around facial recognition. Now, this was a woman of color. So her face, being of color, wasn't being recognized the way that the algorithms of facial recognition were recognizing everybody else.
Oh, wow. Whew.
So you and I could go get, and our face would be recognized, but she was going up and it wasn't recognizing her face. So what she discovered is there is unintentional bias in the code, in this case, written by IBM for the facial recognition software.
Wow.
And it really opened the door for, really at that point, not that IBM was trying to impose, segregation, it was unintentional bias. And so that's part of what the Lydian Foundation is focused on, is how do we measure our biases? And that now goes to the foundation of the regenerative economics and the MicroCity models, with integrity being the foundation of it, is classes and education and feedback in discovering our own biases. I have biases. We all have biases. Sometimes we just don't recognize them all.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's fascinating, but you're right. I think a lot of corporations are trying to train their people on unconscious bias, and it's it's a difficult thing, but once you recognize it, you can work on it. But just simple, when you think about coding, it didn't even occur to me about the bias in coding. So
you code it because you use models that you're familiar with,
right?
When you're doing the coding. I mean, I've been using artificial intelligence for, well, before they called it artificial intelligence, we just used to call it machine learning.
I know. It's like when everybody talks about smart cities, I feel like I was doing it back in the 90s. So
oh goodness, I mean, running around the world, yeah. So I mean, but we all pick models, okay? And we do this. We're humans. We pick models that we can understand, and we know, and we build and we learn things from those models. I mean, yeah, we have bias. You just have to recognize it and be open about it, and not be, damning to another person that hasn't learned this about themselves yet.
Yeah, well, we're hoping to change the world here with Hera City. So we want all cultures, diversity, everything is inclusive, everything is really important. I think if we're going to survive and do a better job with humanity and the planet, I think that's number one issue. Tell me about neural blockchain. What is that?
So neural blockchain is a multi-tiered blockchain. We have a primary core layer of it that is where everything ultimately ends up registered in that blockchain. Then we have another layer, like a neural net, that operates in what we call the fog, or the edge of the network. It could be operating in the server that you might have in your business or your office, and it's sitting there operating close to proximity to serving up things that need to be recorded into the blockchain, and mirroring and partnering with its peers. Then we have layer 3, which is designed to fit in your cell phone, small computing objects and IoT environments and things like that. Much smaller, lightweight, and able to, as an example, network very quickly to accomplish, tasks and record things. Then we have a 4th layer that we developed. We actually developed this quite some time ago. We have a completely off-network capacity to do transactions into the blockchain. We've had this for years, which allows us now to take a credit card-like device and and go buy or transact something without being connected to the internet. Now, maybe with things like Starlink and others coming up, that we're not going to find any place on the planet we can't be connected. But when I was doing this 15 years ago, Iridium, which was the last project I was on with Motorola, was it. And it is certainly not going to support these little devices. So anyway, I think it's important, especially when you start bringing this economy, regenerative economy, into growing countries like the Bahamas or Africa or South America or even the US and things like that. So yeah, that's kind of a cool thing.
Yeah, you know what? There's a lot of countries out there that don't have an infrastructure yet today, and they get to bypass all that stuff that we've done in some of these first world countries and go leap bounds into the new world. I guess that's kind of exciting territory for you, huh?
Yeah, I think that's I mean, like, if you look at what happened with the Chinese, when they started to bring out wireless, et cetera, they skipped over all that early stuff we did and went right straight to wireless. And when we step into one of our MicroCity designs, we're implementing microgrid, both wireless and power grid technologies that are generations ahead of the power grid systems that took Texas down and remember the Northeast power outage.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, our power grids are so arcane. And again, here's our human legacy thinking taking place. Believe it or not, countries are still thinking about building huge power plants as nuclear power plants. I mean, seriously, we've been building small modular reactors for 70 years. The US military has, 60 some odd of these nuclearized ships running around the world. We have decades and decades of experience in building small nuclear reactors. And there is a reason that they're not commercialized. And most of it has to do with cost, especially when you impose the cost of dealing with the waste products, okay? And if you look at the latest numbers on all the various horizontals of renewable energy, not just wind, solar, but geothermal, tidal, the number of systems that we have matured and developed over the last several decades has come down to where the cost of energy is, it should be going to near nothing. As a matter of fact, there was a conference in Europe before the pandemic where they forecasted that by 2050, for all practical intent and purposes, energy will have a zero cost. We'll have so much decentralized grid-based energy systems that are renewable. Now, if we start putting in multi-billion-dollar nuclear power plants that aren't going to get paid off, and we're expecting the cost of energy to go down to near zero, does that sound like a good use of our capital and our resources as nations?
No.
I wouldn't certainly support it.
No.
So
Very
anyway.
cool. What are, Mark, what do you see for yourself in the next 10 years? Where's your, you got a lot of passion in what you're doing. And where do you want to take it to the next 10 years?
Well, I hope to take us by demonstrating through building of the models that we're talking about, which we are doing. We have the capital to do it. We have the locations. We have sovereign agreements with heads of state to come in and do this kind of framework. Rather than stand up on a podium and talk about what we're going to do, my next 10 years or so is all about doing exactly what I'm talking about and inviting the world to come learn and share. The first thing out of my mouth when I meet somebody new is collaboration. There are not enough of us to go around the world. We need to gather more and more visionaries and more people that are willing to, as Alan Tofer would say, the illiterate of the 21st century are not those that can't read or write. They are those that can't learn, unlearn, and relearn. And that's my objective, is to help the world for those that choose to learn, unlearn, and relearn. So 10 years from now, I hope that you're coming around and visiting us in MicroCities. Perhaps one of them is yours.
Absolutely. Well, I really enjoyed this time with you today, and I'm glad we crossed paths. So thank you for Debbie Bartlett for that. Truly appreciate it. It is, I think what you're up to is brilliant. I like the way you think. And obviously we all want to have a better world for humanity, and Hera City wants to be that city that's driving a new platform in regards to what we can do to live better and for the planet and for ourselves. So Mark, I really appreciate this discussion today and enjoyed it and hope to have many more. So thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on Hera TV. Catch us for another episode, and we'll see you again. All right. Bye.